All right, guys, let's talk about this higher order questions presentation and the questions that are part of the essay assignment from Springboard. This is the higher order questions that goes with the Flight from Conversation essay that you'll read, paired with that spoken word poetry assignment. So let's go ahead and talk about what higher order questions means. Let me go ahead and open this presentation. They are similar to the 3 levels of questions that we talked about last year, where you have a factual question, then you take that fact and you make an inference question from it, and then you take that inference and you apply it and create a universal question. This is similar to what we did with that. So you're still kind of working with that idea. And the idea here is that for you, you will be writing questions that you might use to get your fellow students to think about the text. So think like a teacher, basically. All right, so higher order questions. We particularly like to use higher order questions when we are having a discussion. And so with something like particularly a Socratic seminar, which is a type of discussion, the idea here is to have people collaborate together, to think together. So you come armed with questions that can get your fellow participants to think about a text or an idea in a meaningful way. It's not about winning. This is not like a debate where one side can win or not win. The idea here is to have everyone participating by giving them a different perspective, and by you participating in the subject, in the discussion, to think about things from a different perspective, because everyone's going to come with different questions and they're going to see the topic from their own experience, and then we can all work together to better understand that. So there are 3 levels of questions, and this is what we've talked about before. We have literal questions. They can just be answered by referring back to the text, and these examples are from that essay, so they'll make more sense when you read the essay. The interpretive or interpretive question calls for inferences because the answer is not directly in the text. However, you can take the textual evidence, think about your own experience, and come up with an inference that answers the question. And then finally, universal questions. Universal questions, of course, go beyond the text. What are the larger issues or ideas raised by the text? These are the questions that go into an idea or a theme that applies to anyone. That's why it's called universal. So last year, those of you who were in my class, remember we did this with the scene from To Kill a Mockingbird where Jim had to go back and get his pants off the fence. And of course, the literal question had to do with just something about the pants, that they were folded, that they were mended, that they were just waiting there for him. That's something specifically answered by the text. Then we asked an interpretive question. We created an interpretive question on, how does Jim feel about that? Why is Jim afraid? Why does it bother him? Something like that. So that you are taking your experience and you're adding into the text to come up with an answer. And then, of course, the universal question was kind of applied to all of us. What would we think if we were in that position? How would we feel if we found these things and such and such? So interpretive and universal questions are the type of thoughtful questions that you should be writing to engage discussion. Literal questions don't engage discussion. You might use one to get people on the right track, but for the most part, literal questions aren't going to go anywhere because you answer with a fact and there's nothing really to discuss. So preparing to write thoughtful questions, and all of this is going to be very specific to this Turkle article, The Flight from Conversation. So this is the question that we want to go back to the article with. To what extent does technology assist or impair our ability to communicate with one another? So after you've read it through once, then I want you to go back through. We're going to go back through and annotate the article to identify the claim and show specific supporting evidence and rhetorical devices that go with this question. We want our questions that we create for discussion to to be related to this? To what extent does technology assist or impair our ability to communicate with one another? So, what is the evidence in her op-ed that answers this overarching question is what we want to look for. And we'll do this in class as well. So those of you that will see me in face-to-face class, we'll read through the essay and we'll talk about it. And if you're virtual on that day, then feel free the next day to ask questions about this, and we'll talk about it a little bit then too. So interpretive questions in this context for this lesson are questions that require the reader to come to an understanding regarding the author's intended purpose or meaning. So what you're going to go back to is look at what Turkle has written and make an inference about why she's doing the thing she's doing and ask a question about it. Perhaps her reasons for using a piece of evidence, for taking a certain tone, for using a specific appeal. So a good way to start is an interpretive question is with the word why, in relation to Turkle's purpose. Why did she put it this way? Why did she choose this word over that word? Why does she use an anecdote about a 16-year-old boy? Why did she use an emotional appeal here? That kind of thing. Okay, so those are interpretive questions. Inferential questions are similar, but now we're focused on the text itself. This is a level 2 question where you are asking readers to read between the lines about something and make an inference based on what we already know about the subject. It's similar to an interpretive question. It's asking you to make an inference, only we are asking about the text itself, what the text itself means, rather than the author's purpose and motivation. So you can still work with why, but it has more to do with why is this evidence useful to the audience? What does this really mean when you read between the lines? But in any way, what you want to do here is ask an inference about the text itself, word choice, anecdote choice. You're not asking why the author used it, but what does that textual evidence mean? How can it be applied to a person? What's the between the lines point of this word or this phrase or this anecdote? All right, and finally, evaluative questions. Evaluative questions require readers to make judgments regarding the author's ideas, argument, or effectiveness of the text. This is where you're getting to kind of the universal question stage, because you, as the reader, are going to decide, do you agree with the author's views or point of view? Or whether, despite agreement, you believe the author has supported their claim well. These questions might begin with how or why, and they will center on whether a piece of evidence or an appeal effectively supports the author's claim. And so we're thinking a little bit more universally here. Do you think you're asking a question that questions whether or not a specific piece of evidence is effective? So again here, what you're going to do is you're thinking like a teacher, and you are creating questions that force your participants to think about these things. For our interpretive question, you're writing a question to make students, in quotes, think about the author's purpose. Why did the author do this thing? For an inferential question, you are writing a question to make your students consider what's between the lines. What's the bigger picture? What do they know in their own experience that gives them more information about this thing, more than just what's in the text? Okay, what's the subtext? And then for the evaluative question, you're writing a question to get your readers, your students, to consider, is this effective? Okay, now I know that's a lot, and it's why, even though I'm doing this video for this, we're going to go over some of this in class. There's an assessment assignment here that is to get you to create these types of questions. There's one of each type of questions. It's the exit ticket from this lesson. Just do your best. We're going to talk about how well these questions work in discussion, okay? So don't be afraid to just go with your gut. Don't worry about whether it's right or wrong in quotation marks, because there's no right or wrong specifically here. And we'll go from there. All right.